What is up, RotoGrinders? We are back for another NFL season. The NFL Pick 6 show is going down once again. They said it wouldn't happen, but it is. Bringing back the original crew from last year. John Daigle from 4 for 4, from BetSpurs as well. You got a sweet new setup there going on. At least this is the first time I'm seeing it. What's up, Daigle? How are things in your world? How was your off season? I do enjoy what's going on there as far as the studio. It's a nice upgrade. I guess you're not hanging out with Silva anymore, I assume?
Was there an off season? Let's start there. Also, lots of changes, Dean. Lots of changes for better or worse behind the scenes. BetSpurs, as you said, the new company, 4 for 4 football, where all the redraft content is, where I've been working at all off season. And then the new office, in Chicago, no longer with Silva. He still has come over from time to time and stayed on the couch. Reeves has been here, had drinks with me on the patio. And we got a little title build, a bookshelf like everyone has. My favorite golf course, Banff Springs. The lights, everything's good here. Chicago still.
Very nice. That's an impressive little setup. I like the lighting as well, too. Of course, Rich Hribar back with us again. Sharp football analysis, from the worksheet. I was listening to some of your pod today with Sigmund Bloom, the Sharp Angles podcast, the prepping for the show. I put some work in, Rich. I'm mostly off to you guys, but I want to hear – Daigle's talking about how there's no offseason. Me, I take a football offseason. I just do. When I play DFS, I play all the sports. I was grinding baseball today. I've been grinding baseball the last 5 months. Of course, I'm keeping an eye as far as what's going on football-wise, but I'm not digging into every snap in the preseason. And I leave it up to you. I leave it up to John and everybody else to tell me what's going on. But, welcome back, Rich. And, anything you want to raise Daigle's setup? Or what else do you want to show off in the backdrop there?
He has a new place too, a new office.
I moved this off season too. Yeah. So spending some of that sharp football money. It's been a good off season. It's been fun. We're here though now, and I believe now this will surpass the run that me and Evan and I had in the show. This will be me and Daigle's 4th year, and me and Evan did it 3 years. Yep. So my 7th year total with the I came out. Is it still Roto? Am I allowed to say RotoGrinders? Is it still RotoGrinders?
Oh yeah, it's still RotoGrinders.
The Roto with Dan. Dan bring me in, so thank you, Dan. This is year 7, and now me and Daigle are the tag team. Like when you get a new partner, like we've had a longer run now.
Who's the Marty Jannetty?
I tried to reach for one, and that's not really my bag. It's more Daigle's field, and I tried to really quickly reach for like a tag team that like swap partners, and I blanked.
You did well. It's okay. You tried your best, and that also means that we already need to set in stone Dean coming back. All of us coming back next year, because then that sets the record for like threesomes. Not threesomes.
Whoa, menage.
I shouldn't have said that. Trios. How about that? Trios is the word I'm looking for.
There you go. Fair enough. That works. Sponsored by Thrive. We'll talk about Thrive later on in the show. It's a different way to play fantasy. You're building lineups via props. We'll have that conversation later on. If this is your first time on the Pick 6 show, how it works around here, we focus on 3 games. 3 main games on the main slate. Daigle's usually the one that nominates him. We got him pretty early, and I was in midseason form, and I guess it wasn't that hard, Daigle, because I was 3 for 3. I'm like, I like to play the game myself. Like it's a game I just play. Nobody else even knows what's going on. But I like to try to guess. You threw him. I guess it was you. I assume it was. You threw it our way energetically as far as the games we selected.
I still also signature my emails energetically in case no one gets that inside joke. It is my permanent signature. It's staying that way. I did throw the games. And although we've had a month to look at the salaries, usually I actually avoid them. I think that's better. But with 4 for 4, I've been working with TJ Hernandez on the DFS MVP podcast in particular. And so we've been doing early looks on them. And so I've got to jump in a couple of weeks early. But what made this offseason different, Dean, as we look at the big picture of the slate, is that we really didn't have like a significant injury to a top 50 player, top 75, some would say. And so normally we go into this week with discounts, with values because an injury happened. But like instead we get Draftkings where almost every wide receiver with a role is significantly underpriced, but everyone's still going to log jam on the same guys. So we'll just do the same week 1 thing we always do and pivot to someone around that price at lesser ownership. And then on FanDuel, whereas we usually show up and say it's a pick'em game, I'm having a hard time playing a pick'em game on FanDuel. I think they actually priced everyone quite accordingly for week 1. To the point where everyone has to sacrifice at least one position. And then I'm curious if everyone's just going to sacrifice the same position. We'll get there eventually. And then that leaves us pivot options there. So I think it's actually a really fun week one slate.
Yeah, it's funny you said that because I was trying to make I was messing around on DK, and I play Fanduel a good bit as well, obviously. But on DK, like you say, it's hard to make a bad lineup on DraftKings. Like if you use like all your salary essentially within $500, it's just hard to make bad lineups that are realistic lineups. We did get Pearson, Houston, who's kind of sort of somewhat cheap. We'll talk about him. And the price on Pittman on DK at 5.5 seems pretty egregious, and I think he's going to be pretty popular. We'll be talking about that, obviously. I did run some optimals pre-show, just kind of see what was popping up. And, of course, if you guys aren't aware, we're recording this on a Wednesday night. We do have some people watching us live. Shout out to those in the YouTube channel watching us live. We do appreciate y'all watching us. Going to keep an eye on the chat. If anything comes up organically,
We missed you, demons.
kindly hit that.
We still don't watch Red Zone, but we did miss y'all. I will say that.
I didn't want to get into that because that's like a week 15 argument. Like it's really just angers me. I just can't.
This is the last year that it's DirecTV. The ticket is DirecTV. It's amazing. The stranglehold is about to end.
Is it going to get chopped up? Or I know like Amazon, but
I think it's going. I think the leader in the clubhouse was for sure going to go to a streaming service. I had heard Apple or Amazon are in the mix. I just assume Bezos is getting everything at this point.
Scott Hansen,
Roombas,
just fine. He will gladly land on his feet.
Yeah, but Bezos is just like buying all like the TV shows he wants to make. Like he's doing Lord of the Rings. He's like, you know what? I want a Mass Effect show. He's like, we're gonna make a Mass Effect show. He's just throwing money everywhere. So I assume he's gonna get it.
Yeah, somebody's gonna get paid. The NFL is gonna make their money for sure, and we'll find it. We'll figure it out. But
Dean, what do you know about the Mass Effect series?
Is that the Lord of the Rings show?
No, it's a video game.
I don't know what you're talking about.
It's a video game series.
The greatest video game trilogy.
I have a wheelhouse. What is it? What should I know? What should I have to Google after the show? Explain it to me real quick.
Xbox 360, Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. Everyone has a favorite one, but it's never 3.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll give it a shot. I have a PS4. I'm a little behind, but I mostly just play like the sports
I don't have
games.
that.
Yeah, they're on 5 now, but I guess you got on a list or something like that. Who knows? People don't care. They want to talk NFL DFS. I was in the middle of explaining the rules, and I cut myself off before. Yeah, we focus on the 3 main games in the slate, and then after that, we run it back, give our favorite players position by position that are not in those 3 main games. Mm-hmm. No surprise, the 3 highest team totals is what we're going to be focusing on. Philadelphia at Detroit is the very first game on the board. 48.5 is the total. That's the 3rd highest board. Total on the board as far as the main slate. It's main slate only. We're not talking about Thursday or Sunday night or Monday night. Philadelphia at Detroit. Jalen Hurts gets his best friend AJ Brown there in Philly. Detroit has all the momentum that Hard Knocks can possibly give you. Detroit is a 4-point dog right now, John. In a dome, we like that. Hurts, we like quarterbacks that have wheels. First, I guess start with the Philadelphia side. How do you think AJ Brown is going to work in this offense?
Yeah, let's talk about the overarching offense for the Eagles first off, because we know they leaned on the league's highest run play rate with 33 carries per game from week 6 on last year. They changed their identity entirely compared to their first 5 games when they averaged 22 carries per contest. But given how their offseason played out, as you already mentioned, AJ Brown, and then immediately extending him upon trading for him on draft night, and then how they deployed Jalen Hurts sneakily in the preseason, only playing him for one game, one drive essentially, but still having him throw 6 passes on 7 dropbacks, knowing this is my narrative of it anyways, knowing they have to see what they have in him, since they have those 3 picks in the first 2 rounds they're sitting on in 2023. That's what's looming over this organization. And they arguably have not only the best personnel in their own division, but personnel that can compete with the league's best offensive line and the entire NFC. They have to see what they have in Jalen Hurts. And so I think they have to throw more in general this year, but certainly more than last year's 34% pass play rate with a 6-point lead. And so I like the game script quite a bit. Jalen Hurts will probably be high rostered. That's what we're really arguing here. But remember, if game script does change for the Eagles, we already saw Hurts be successful with that game script with 2 300-plus passing yard games in those first 5 starts when they weren't a run-heavy team. And also in week 1, remember, he didn't reach 300 yards, but he still had 260 yards with 3 passing touchdowns. So he can be successful through the air, if that's what they choose to do and flip the switch in week 1. And so that's why I like this game from a up-tempo standpoint sneakily.
By just pulling up our ownership stuff, and I don't like to focus on ownership too much on a Wednesday night. This stuff is obviously fickle and fluid, and it's going to change throughout the week. But and quarterback ownership generally doesn't get too high on a full slate, 13 gamer. But we do have Hurts currently as the number one projected ownership guy on FanDuel at 14% at 8K, also on DK at 13%, 6.8K. Daigle, your thoughts? Just kind of starting with Philadelphia as well. I'm sorry, Hribar.
we're getting back into regular season shape. We're all getting back in.
Yeah, keep it going. Yeah, I echo a lot of what Daigle said. I mean, I definitely believe the Eagles are going to be a lot more aggressive than they were to close last season. I mean, a lot of what happened last season was a survival in Nick Sirianni's first season, and now this year is putting a plan in place and understanding where he wants to go. I mean, they wanted to be aggressive early in the last season, and it just didn't work out for a number of reasons, due to injuries, Jalen Hurts' performance. But yeah, this roster's loaded. I mean, what you're going to get unique with Jalen Hurts is who you're going to stack him with if you're going to roll him naked. There's a lot of options here. I mean, this is a team that in the Detroit Lions that they've added a few defensive pieces, but by all accounts, like they're still a team we can pick on in the run game and the pass game and at all levels of the pass game. They don't have any linebackers that can cover anybody. Their cornerbacks were really rough, last year. So it's, do you want to get Arthur Juan? Do you want to get Devontae Smith? Do you want to get Dallas Goedert? And how creative can we be? Do you want to get a double? We're also going to need the Lions to really punch back here. Last year it was a 44-6 game. That was with Anthony Lynn. That was pre-Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson's had a full offseason to kind of incorporate more of the stuff he wants to do. The Lions, though, when you look at it from like a top-down stance, they're coming in with a couple injuries that are kind of troubling coming in. Vitai's on the 4-game PUP. He's not going to play at all. Frank Ragnow hasn't practiced at all to start this week. And this Eagles front is pretty gnarly, and they go deep. They can roll guys in and out. So, I mean, it's already going to be tough sledding already for a guy like Jared Goff to kind of match points here because that's what we're going to really need. I think when you look at it from the Lions side, it makes DeAndre Swift kind of a really tough play. He's going to need to rely on that receiving work. And when you look at last year, his layout isn't the same as it was. That runway the first half of the season before Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of really took off. He was kind of getting there late in games on dump-offs, and that's really not going to be what the Lions are about this year. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be a focal point of this offense. And, it's a very small sample in the preseason, but the dude got targeted on 38% of his routes on this preseason. He was almost at 3.5 yards per out run in the preseason, right where he left off last year. And he's going against the Jonathan Gannon defense that is just a primarily zone-based defense. He's going to avoid seeing Darius Slay and James Bradbury on the outside. He's going to be able to get kind of, free releases on the interior. And not only did he lead the Detroit Lions in targets against zone coverage, he led the entire NFL in targets against zone coverage the final 6 weeks last season. So if you're looking for a natural bring back, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I feel like a lot of people undervalued him during the fantasy offseason. He looks underpriced on both sites immediately to jump off to start the season to get value. And we were just scooping up value on him to close last year.
The Lions also averaged 5.4 yards per play whenever they were trailing, which they did for 37% of their plays. And that's because of the grave they dug themselves weekly. And so I actually think it's if we do get some pushback here from Jared Goff, who of course his fantasy points per game, yards per attempt have dipped for 3 consecutive seasons now. And whenever Ben Johnson took over with Dan Campbell in the second half of the season, although Goff was more efficient and having a higher completion rate, he did throw 7 fewer pass attempts per game once they got Anthony Lynn out after their bye as the team's play caller. And so, although I do think there's some, there could be some pushback here. Yes, like Reeb said, maybe we should be a little bit concerned.
Amon-Ra on FanDuel 6'5", 6'1" on DK. John, do you think the Lions punch back? Do they hang in this game? And if they don't, is there a possible concern of and again, this is just the way I remember things. Correct me if I'm wrong. That they might just shut things down with Hurts and just kind of run the ball in the second half, and that's obviously not ideal. They do want to see what they have in them long term, and if he's something they want to commit to. But at the same time, whether they're by 2 touchdowns the fourth quarter, and now we're just getting Gainwell and that kind of nonsense. And I don't think we want tournaments yada yada. We don't really want much of this Eagles run offense, far as I can tell. Your thoughts? Is Detroit going to hang? Of course, if they hang, Amon-Ra with Hurts, and you want to pair Hurts with Brown or Goddard, or both, or naked, however you want to do it, is pretty interesting, of course. But, Detroit, are they hanging in this game or what?
Amon-Ra was my pick, too, just because TJ Hawkinson did have a chance to break out. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't play over 80% of the snaps until that final stretch whenever Hawkinson got injured. And I'm not attributing that league-winning stretch Amon-Ra had to Hawkinson's injury, but Hawkinson to that point still at the end of the year, once he was put out for the season, finishes the tight end 15 in points per game on a career high 7 targets per game and 21% target share. So he was actually getting hammered targets and did basically nothing with it. And so I haven't been on TJ Hawkinson in redraft all year, especially at the 7 to 9 round range that he's going in. And I'm certainly not on TJ Hawkinson this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown's the only place I really want to go. But Reeves already said, like, I think Devontae Smith is the one. You have your ownership in front of you, Dean. I think he's the one that probably comes in lowest rostered. But as we also try to fluctuate tight end, we know Kyle Pitts is going to be heavily rostered. We may lose George Kittle. We're not sure yet. And so that takes away another top option for us to roster. So like maybe the double stacking option with Hurts, assuming again that they turn into a more pass heavy scheme, is AJ Brown, of course, or Devontae Smith, and then Dallas Goedert, since we at least know that Dallas Goedert ran around on 80% of dropbacks once Zach Ertz was traded in week 7. And that's when he closed the year averaging 6.2 targets and a 24.5% target share.
Smith, we got a 4% on DK currently for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Question here in chat, John. Gibran is asking about DJ Chark. How do we feel about Chark as a pivot away from Amon-Ra?
I mean,
that sounds like a good response.
I mean, I can lay in here, I think DJ Chark from a tactical stance is what really helps Amon-Ra St. Brown, but this is just a terrible layout for him when you look at this particular matchup. I mean, the Eagles, based on the type of defense they play, again, Jonathan Gannon coming from, under the tutelage of Matt Eberflus, who went out with the Bears. I mean, the quarterbacks against the Eagles, because they play so much heavy zone over the top coverage, had the lowest ADOT, depth of target, in the NFL last year. They don't give up big plays. I mean, they were number one in the NFL in completion rate on throws, over 15 yards downfield. I mean, they just don't give up big plays. The defense is structured that way. He's going to be on the perimeter against Darius Slay and James Bradbury we talked about. I think this is a DJ Chark basically like, dude, run guys off the football for us, because it's going to be more of a Hawkinson Amon-Ra game. And
it wasn't just last year. Like Jared Goff has now gone 3 consecutive seasons with a downfield target rate less than 20 yards on less than 10% of his throws for 3 consecutive years now. Like he just doesn't throw downfield. That's why I just worry overall about Chark.
I was waiting. I thought for sure you were going to say, Hribar, that he's exercising. That's your go-to with.
Oh yeah, man. Listen, yeah, he's going to be doing a lot of exercising, I believe.
People are playing bingo out there. They wanted to cross that box off, but I guess we got plenty of time.
We got to get those Millie Maker plays out early.
Yeah. All right. Donovan Peoples-Jones, anybody? All right. Hey, your favorite stack, John. Your favorite stack in this game. If you're going to stack something here, how would you play it?
I think it might actually be Devonta Smith. AJ Brown has now finished top 15 and targets 10 to 19 yards from the line of scrimmage for 3 consecutive seasons with the Titans. And I think that's how they want to use him, as more of an intermediate option, but hammer him more targets. But just knowing the volatility of Devonta Smith, maybe getting the easiest coverage of his life, even though he did finish only as the wide receiver 44 in points per game as their alpha target last year. I think coupling Devonta Smith is the way to go, given, like you said, the low ownership here.
Rich, how about yourself? You have all things considered, obviously, ownership and salary and yada, yada. What would be your favorite way to play a stack in this Philadelphia-Detroit game?
Probably Hurts, Goddard, Amon-Ra. And then if you're going like short field, I think you can just run the double and go for the onslaught and just play Arthur Juan and Goddard with Amon-Ra and Hurts. Just go crazy, man, in the small field stuff. All
right. We got anything else here, boys? Or are we moving on the game too? I think we're moving on, right?
I love how I love how we just skipped the Eagles backfield, though. And I agree. We should keep on skipping the Eagles backfield.
I mean, I threw it out there. Feel free to tell me I should play Boston Scott.
we're still battling the Miles Sanders midweek injury too. I think he plays, but it's a soft tissue. Who knows?
Okay. Yeah, I missed that one. I was going through injuries today, and it's certainly possible I missed something there, but all right, please feel free to correct me.
Injuries snuck up, by the way. I thought we were pretty good on Monday, and then the first injury reports came out. It's like, oh, maybe we're buried a little more than we thought here this week.
Yeah, so the preseason was great for players not getting hurt, but it was honestly the worst offseason I can remember for guys like reporting on guys that were already hurt. Like, we got no information on guys that were hurt. Like, what was going on with them? Were they practicing? What were they doing? We haven't heard anything like on guys, like Drake London just went like 3 weeks without practicing and no one talked about it. Russell Gage basically didn't practice for like 2.5 weeks. Miles Sanders. Like, we haven't heard like about like anything what guys, people didn't even know Jalen Waddle was hurt.
Right.
Like, it's been one of the worst off seasons.
Najee Harris, right? That was another one.
Yeah. Actual reporting. Like, we did really good on players not getting new injuries, but like we didn't get jack on like guys that were hurt through the preseason.
Najee Harris was like a serious one, like a Liz Frank sprain, and he's like, "Nah, I'm good. I'm gonna play." Okay, great.
Yeah, we saw Dobbins arguing on Twitter with Rappaport, which was kind of interesting, dunking on him, I suppose. That was pretty fun. What else? Okay, so Deontay Johnson, let's just knock him out. Like, if Deontay Johnson looks not great, right? It's Wednesday night, we don't know, but I'm not optimistic from what I read, but we'll see. Stay tuned. Kittle, are they playing games in San Francisco, or is he actually? Who knows what the story is there?
I mean, it's George Kittle. We're gonna like probably give the benefit of the doubt that he's banged up, right?
I would assume
already.
So. Yeah. Yeah. The greatest predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And then there's Ertz, who's questionable, and I guess looks more positive than negative.
Yeah, Rondo looks like he's gonna play.
That's how you segue, by the way, Dean.
Yeah.
You use that segue.
Yeah. I saved that one for last for a reason. Yeah. Kansas City and Arizona, the biggest total on the board, 53.5 is a total. Kansas City, almost a 30 total, despite, of course, losing Tyreek Hill. I saw a quote today from Patrick Mahomes. We're going to love this as DFS players. It's going to be something different every week. That's fun. We're going to play some whack-a-mole in KC. It's going to be good times. In Arizona, of course, a whole reshuffling there. The absence of Chase Edmonds, Christian Kirk got the bag there in Jacksonville. DeAndre Hopkins, 86 for 6 weeks, and we don't know about Zach Ertz and his calf. Well, John, the state of Kansas City, I guess that quote is kind of sort of what we expect, right? Not one guy necessarily is going to replace Tyreek. Going to be a group effort. They brought in, Juju. They brought in MVS. Sky Moore as a nice draft pick. Mecole Hardman, maybe, possibly. I'm told he's talented, but you never really know. And then Kelsey's there. He's a year older. Was he 33, 34 at this point? Your thoughts on the state of Kansas City, and also, feel free to apply it to this matchup here in Arizona in the Dome, which is nice.
It isn't a dome. I'm just so confused about this game because the Chiefs team total has also risen more than any other team total this week, 2 points higher than the next closest team total on this main slate. And so, of course, we want pieces of a team who's projected to score at least 29 points in Vegas sports books. But at the same time, we also know what happened in the second half of last year. No quarterback registered more dropbacks against two eye safeties than Patrick Mahomes last year. And what that led to from week 8 on was him leading the league in dump offs, essentially yards after the catch. And thus that became him averaging from week 8 on 18.8 fantasy points per game. So basically a fringe top 10 quarterback, as opposed to what he averaged in the first half of the year, which was 25.5 fantasy points per game. Even though he averaged 7 fewer fantasy points per game, like the Chiefs offense was still an engine that couldn't be stopped. I think we talked about it last year, how they were still leading in yards per play and points per drive during that boring stretch where all he did was dump the ball off and depend on Yak. And now they don't have like one of the best Yak players in Tyreek Hill. Now they have role players. And so I'm still somewhat worried. I still think they get the job done, but I keep looking elsewhere, honestly, at other quarterbacks, at other offenses, maybe trying to find pivots in CEH, who we'll talk about in a bit, rather than prioritizing Patrick Mahomes. So I'm hoping Reeves can sell me on the Chiefs passing offense because we know people are going to want to stack them.
It's easier to do so now. The absence of Hill being replaced by 5.2 Juju, 4.7 MBS, 3.8 more if you want to throw that dart in like big tournaments. Used to be like you're trying to make Mahomes and Kelsey and Hill work, and it would really hurt the rest of your lineup. But a little bit easier to do so these days. You got some clarity, Rich, as far as is there somebody you like that in season long? Anybody amongst these you thought was being overdrafted or underdrafted? You're going to kind of bring the DFS slate, or you think it's just going to be any given week? Who's going to rise amongst this group as the number one, or it's just going to be kind of a group effort essentially?
I think they will be more versatile, but I think there's a lot of reasons to really kind of back their team total here. Well, I mean, one, when you look at it, I think the Chiefs kind of were like a little bit of a sleeping giant this year. Everyone's picked the Bills to go to the Super Bowl. The team that's gone to the AFC Championship 4 years in a row, kind of not getting a lot of respect. And I think that they've kind of tipped their hand of what they're going to do a little bit with Tyreek Hill out. I mean, you look at what they did in the preseason. Like, this is a team that is going to play a lot more heavier personnel than they have in years past. And that makes a lot of sense with the loss of Tyreek Hill and this great offensive line that they rebuilt in the course of an offseason last year. I mean, just a little bit in the small sample in the preseason, I mean, they were in 11 personnel just 51% of the time. The 3 previous years with Patrick Mahomes, it was 66% of his dropbacks. That allows them to do a couple different things. One, to play that power football if teams want to sit in too high. Also, it puts Travis Kelce more in line and gets him in more advantageous situations against linebackers, which we saw a little bit from Travis Kelce at his age 32 season. Like, teams started to combat him with multiple bodies, and he had a great season still, but there was like moments where teams were able to do some things to him to kind of take him out of some games. And you look at Mahomes in the preseason, man, Jesus, he was phenomenal. I mean, 18 to 26, almost 9 yards, surpassed him again preseason, but I think this team's going to really be kind of really multiple and a lot more versatile than they were. Then when you look at the Cardinals, I mean, Jesus, I mean, their defense looks so rough on paper right now. Not only did they lose Chandler Jones and Jordan Hicks this offseason, who are among the top 5 of their team in pressures last year, Marcus Golden, game time decision, hasn't practiced yet this week. J.J. Watt, toe, hasn't practiced yet this week. I mean, this is a defense that was already 22nd in pressure rate collectively last year. You're talking about 4 major players to get after the quarterback against a guy like Patrick Mahomes. Then on the back end, Trayvon Mullen hasn't practiced yet. Marcus Wilson was one of the worst slot cornerbacks in the NFL last season. Byron Murphy, is their best cornerback. I mean, it is rough defensively. I mean, when you look at this Cardinals team, between injuries and their absolute objective talent, I mean, they've got really good safeties, and they've got some versatile linebackers in Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons to kind of combat Kelce. But the rest of this defense looks awful on paper coming into this game. And that's why the spread has consistently moved throughout the week. So, yeah, I mean, if you force me to pick a favorite guy, and granted, we're looking a lot backwards when we're looking forward. I mean, it does set up to be a situation if like Juju has anything like to go at the start of the year. Like, this is a matchup that was just slot cornerbacks absolutely shredded the Cardinals last year. A big part because of Marco Wilson, like I said. I mean, they were 29th in yardage per game allowed to wide receivers in the slot last year. They allowed a league high 18 touchdowns out of the slot to wide receivers. Yeah, I mean, if there's a guy here like to kind of latch onto outside of Kelce, I think it's Juju. Because like I said, I mean, Arizona, they have like versatile athletic guys in the middle of the defense, and that's it. So they've got some guys that kind of at least throw at Kelce. It's not going to move you off of Kelce and say, like, I'm going to run away. But, I mean, it did bear out in the kind of the numbers last year, too, how good Arizona was against tight ends. I mean, they were 5th in catch rate, 10th in yards per target out of the tight ends. They only had 2 touchdowns, the tight ends, last year. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, if Juju has anything left, it does kind of more of a signal here because, I mean, that's where you want to attack the Cardinals.
He signed a 1-year, show me a contract, and we'll see how it goes. And certainly he's got to be plenty motivated to have a big year coming off injury. Daigle, if I was to pin you down, one of these receivers, even in the chat, somebody's talking about Hardman. Hardman is their guy, and I guess it could be. Who is your favorite, all things considered, as far as the KC receivers?
Well, it's early enough, and we do this every year. We even still do this in week 3 if we have priors, and we ask ourselves, does X player really in leading the team in targets, can he still usurp Y, who is the better athlete, the better option, the better every down player? And that's kind of where I stand with Juju, like Reeb said, is that I still believe like he can not only lead the Chiefs in targets, I even bet him to, for better or worse, it's a very long shot bet, but I bet him early on in the preseason to also lead the league in receptions. So like I do think he is that player who doesn't come off the field and is an every down reception guy underneath for the Chiefs. So yeah, that would be the one option for me. But I still think, given what we saw in the preseason with CEH always playing with Patrick Mahomes, only coming off for breathers for an ambiguous situation between Jarrett McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco, of course, who is the team's primary kick returner. I still think there's a reason to maybe hope CEH earns this goal line role, since we don't know. Now, we do know he only has 5 carries inside the 5-yard line since week 2 of his rookie year. So like the same coach, it can obviously, that role can change. You can no longer be pigeonholed a la Austin Eckler from Anthony Lynn to Brandon Staley if you have a coaching change. But I do wonder if being healthy for the first time and basically having no competition outside of a late one-year deal signing for bringing Jarrett McKinnon back, if CEH can be a 70, 80% touch guy. And if that's the case, that's kind of where I want to get my exposure instead of the passing game.
There was that window on Twitter when people were losing their minds for Pacheco, and I know like it fluctuated crazily in season-long drafts as well. I guess that window is mostly closed, right? Is that basically?
Well, once he played into the third quarter of the final preseason game, that window cooled off substantially. It became fall very quickly.
Fair enough. Yeah. Rich, what are your thoughts as far as this Kansas City backfield? And feel free to jump over to Arizona. Obviously Arizona kind of revamped or it lost some players. I guess we can say it that way too. The absence of Edmonds, the absence of Kirk, Hopkins being out, and Ertz, we're not really sure. I'm not sure if they have anybody left. Would McBride or Max Williams step up? I think Williams is more of a blocker. I knew he was a pretty good receiver in college, but you tell me if Ertz is out, are we all of a sudden interested in Trey McBride? I have no idea. And then Hollywood, Florida's own Marquise Brown is the number one guy there in Arizona. Rondale Moore is looking pretty positive. And I said, Rich, I mentioned I was listening to your podcast with Bloom, and I've never heard anybody give an endorsement of 39-year-old AJ Brown. And you were AJ Green.
AJ Green, yeah. Adriel Jeremiah.
Oh man, I guess I heard the pitch and I'm like, you know what? It's not a terrible thought. And he's never going to be younger than week 1 this season, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to rush out in your season-long league and pick up, Adriel Jeremiah. But you look at he's going to be a full-time player in like a game like we're anticipating the Cardinals to be trailing and be kind of in jailbreak mode. And also, he was a big play guy. I mean, almost 16 yards per catch last year, 9.2 yards per target. The Chiefs are another team. Like they've got some moving parts defensively. Obviously, you swap, Tyrann Mathieu with Justin Reed. They're going to be playing a rookie cornerback and Trent McDuffie on the outside. So, I mean, yeah, he's a unique way, I think, if you're going to onslaught this game to get some cheap exposure to him because he's, going to be on the field a ton. Zach Ertz is banged up. Rondale Moore, we know is coming off an injury. We don't really know what kind of role is. Will they throw him the football more than 2 yards down the field? Yeah, I think he's kind of interesting. Obviously, Hollywood would be the guy you're going to kind of glom onto initially. I mean, especially with his marriage, with Kyler Murray. I mean, since entering the NFL, only Tyreek Hill has more targets, of 30 or more air yards than Marquise Brown. He's also number 1 in the NFL in throws on those targets deemed inaccurate by the quarterback. Going to Kyler Murray, no quarterback has been more accurate than Kyler Murray since entering the league on those throws. He's number 1 in the NFL in completion rate on those deep throws. He's number 2 in EPA per dropback on those throws behind Justin Herbert. The guy that he targeted the most on those throws was Christian Kirk. So the guy that Hollywood is replacing is Christian Kirk. I think he's going to be in that vertical slot role. Obviously no DeAndre Hopkins gives him a runway. The Chiefs were a team that were kind of exposed downfield last year. And like I said, they've got moving parts in the secondary. They're probably going to take some time to gel. So yeah, I mean, I think you look at those 2 wide receivers. I think obviously James Conner is, playable. I think early in the season, he will be kind of have more of that same role he had. I think big picture, they want to not have James Conner be have that much workload over the course of the season because it's the guy that has never played a full season in the NFL and they're going to want to keep him fresh. But initially to start the year, I mean, they're going to be chasing points. He's at his freshest. I mean, I think he's going to play a lot in this game. We know, not just from one season, but multiple seasons, we've targeted running back play against the Chiefs, and they were just as bad again last year in terms of rushing and receiving performance to running backs. They're a team that gives it all up, 1, because they lead so much, and then 2, because they don't really have to try to stop the run. So yeah, I mean, I think the Cardinals pieces are kind of pretty clear just because the amount of injuries that they've sustained and how muddy it is kind of behind those guys.
John, what do you have as far as the Cardinals? Also, I'm doing this in the fly. Trey McBride, I was not aware of this person. I don't follow the draft. I'm like, next man up looks like. You guys tell me otherwise, but he could be interesting if Ertz doesn't go. He had a ton of catches, ton of yards in the in college at Colorado State, over 1,100 yards last season. Second round draft pick, I believe. Should we get excited about this if Ertz doesn't go?
I think they actually like Max Williams quite a bit too. I think actually Max Williams may be next in line. And outside of the Mackey Award, I have questions about Trey McBride. There are a lot of people who know more about this than me, including Reeves, but I still have a question about Trey McBride at the next level. Probably not ready to roll him out in week 1. But for me, yeah, I think James Conner is interesting because it really comes down to someone overthrowing him for Chase Edmonds' role last year when James Conner was strictly a red zone back until Chase Edmonds was injured. And so then that would then stall him from having the 5.5 targets and 21 touches per game he averaged and 5 starts in place of Chase Edmonds. And I don't think they have that player on this roster. They themselves, the Cardinals, are trying to figure out who it was between Eno Benjamin and Darrell Williams, and I'm still not sure we have that answer. I think it'd actually be a timeshare if James Conner were ever injured, which of course he's been injured every year in the league. And so yes, like on one hand, we don't want to chase that 35% rate of touchdowns he scored inside the red zone, an above average rate that we don't expect to be sustainable. But at the same time, if he's getting every single touch, even in catch up mode against the Chiefs indoors at home, I'm fine chasing those points for targets. And so, yeah, I don't think he's a bad way to get exposure towards the Cardinals.
All right, Rich, you got anything else as far as this game?
No. Yeah, I mean, Trey McBride's interesting for the amount of snaps, but the dude ran 36 routes in the preseason and got 2 targets. Like,
small samples. So that's a lot of routes for 2 targets. That's not very impressive, obviously. By the way, this is the projected to have the 3rd most plays. If you check out,
this is a high volume game for sure. I saw someone in the chat talk about it being a running game. Like this, the Cardinals are going to run a ton of plays. Like the Cardinals are going to run a ton of plays in this game.
Yeah, obviously the more plays, the more opportunity for fantasy points. I also think it's interesting. We got 9 games at 1:00 and 4 in the late slate. But the 4 late games as a collective is pretty appealing.
Always.
Kansas City. Go ahead.
It's going to be a week where, you don't screenshot that green before the afternoon.
It's also a week where we have a lot of a smattering of the plus 50 point totals and then like a bunch of 44 and unders.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, Green Bay, Minnesota is one of the better teams in the 4:00 slate. You got the Giants in Tennessee, which is probably the least appealing. The one we just talked about, KC, Arizona, biggest total on the board. And then Vegas versus the Chargers. That AFC West just feels like a plethora of fantasy points. Just going to be awesome matchups all throughout the season. Of course, the big acquisition for the Raiders, adding Adams, revenge game overall revenge game for the Chargers getting knocked out last season. That absolute debacle of a late night Sunday night game where both teams wanted to tie, or the Chargers wanted to tie. What a disaster. The Chargers is inventing new ways to lose and not make the playoffs. I'm a believer. I think this is the year, but we'll see. They're fun to root for, if nothing else. They're good for DFS. We'll start with that, John, as far as Vegas at the Chargers. 3-point dogs here, 51-52 as far as the total. And the addition of Devontae Adams, how does that change things up for you?
I think Derek Carr is really interesting. I'm particularly on DraftKings since we're looking for that 300-yard game. And as we know, last year the Chargers were a run funnel, and opposing teams knew that, and scheming 30 carries per game against them, a top 5 rate. But I feel as if they shored that weakness up and signing Sebastian Joseph Day this offseason, who played under Brandon Staley previously in 2020 and registered the league's 4th most run stops with Los Angeles. 314-pound nose tackle Austin Johnson, and they drafted 324-pound defensive tackle Otito Ogbonnia, which I know you know as much about as Thanos, Dean. But just know they stuffed their defensive trenches. That's all you need to know after they allowed 5.5 yards per carry before their bye last year as a run funnel. But if that is the case, if the Raiders understand this front 7 got better, thus, maybe we attack the secondary. Carr showed last year, arguably for the first time since he underwent fibula surgery in 2017, that he's open to risk and being more than just a game manager for Las Vegas. Because when Henry Ruggs and Darren Waller were both available up to Las Vegas's Week 8 bye, Derek Carr was actually the QB 11 in fantasy points per game, went 19.5, averaging 324 passing yards and the league's 4th highest rate of throws, 20+ yards downfield. And I think that's how this offense will attack the Chargers, knowing that J.C. Jackson was out. And that was important because an island cornerback like J.C. Jackson meant the Chargers didn't have to send a top 10 blitz rate as they done under Brandon Staley, or as they done in general at a top 10 rate in the past 2 years. And so there's an opportunity here where defensive schemes stay the same and Derek Carr can thrive against them. So I do like the Raiders passing attack here. Yeah,
it feels like it's going to be a bit of a shootout. Of course, the total speaks to it as well. 52. Jackson, you mentioned the cornerback being out for the Chargers. By the way, whatever was going on with Waller being held out, that was just a contract thing. He's fine. I don't. Did he sign his contract? Is that all good to go now?
He magically healed once he got an extension. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's they're basically playing games there, and it makes sense. Like I think his contract wasn't guaranteed, and he wanted to make sure everything he was good to go, get paid before he starts playing. We'll touch on the Raiders, Rich, and then feel free to jump over to the Chargers.
Yeah, the Raiders are interesting. They have a wide range of outcomes. Like this game could shoot out, or it could like ultimately like really disappoint. And I think a lot of it has to do with the Raiders side of the ball, just because everything is new, right? You've got Josh McDaniels coming in. You have another like rotation of offensive linemen. It's the league's worst offensive line. This offensive line's worse than the Bears' offensive line. You add Devontae Adams. Darren Waller hasn't even like really been with the team the entire offseason. Like, what if that he just like pops a wheel, like, you know, the first game trying to like stretch himself out, right? We don't really know. There's a lot of range of outcomes for the Raiders, and Carr was terrible versus the Chargers last year. And that was the version of the Chargers that didn't have Khalil Mack, that didn't have all those defensive tackles, that didn't have Kyle Van Noy, that didn't have Bryce Callahan. I mean, he even kept clean last year, 5.4 yards per pass attempt against the Chargers, 14.4 fantasy points, 15.3 fantasy points. I like him from like a tournament stance because like Daigle said, there's like bonus potential here on DraftKings, but that's it. I don't think he's like necessarily a great streamer because it's just too volatile. I think the situation's really volatile, especially for the first game coming in. And you know, this preseason, we saw a lot of teams not really play anybody. You know, are we going to see like defensive advantage, like, you know, early in the season? Because there just has been like no continuity. A situation like this where there's no continuity, I think is very, very scary. But again, you look at the Chargers last year, I mean, their games averaged a combined 55 points. Like it was number one in the NFL. Like they always these games found a way to get there. We'll see how good that defense is right out of the gates, and if it's something we need to just ultimately like scrap and be scared of or not. But yeah, the Raiders to me are a very volatile like team. Like it's tournament or nothing here. Like I don't feel really good about the median for the Raiders.
Yeah, that's a good call. You talk about there was actually a player on the Raiders that was played in the preseason. Josh Jacobs was playing too much, and people got concerned. Playing in the Hall of Fame game, right into the second quarter, I believe, and that's another one of those backfields I don't think I want any part of. You figure Abdullah is going to be the third down back, and Jacobs, I guess, the number one guy. White's sort of lurking as well. They didn't extend him beyond. They didn't commit to him beyond this year. New regime. If the Chargers get ahead, you know, it's only a 3-point line, obviously, which I think is a little low, but that's just me, and then probably shreds to the public as well. We have a running back to get excited about, right? Austin Eckler, you know, he's awesome. You got to pay for him, obviously. We'll talk about Taylor soon enough. We'll talk about CMC soon enough. Where does he match up for you, Rich, as far as the top running backs on the slate? Where is Eckler for you?
Yeah, this is a great running back slate right away for like premium running backs. Like, I mean, week one, you look at like where the guys you want to play, and like we got a lot of really good running backs that were high draft picks that were in really good spots. Austin Eckler, one of them. The Chargers in general, a year ago, they reached the red zone on 45% of their drives. It was the highest rate in league history, more than the 2007 Patriots. Like you know, and the part of that is Brandon Staley, you know, the aggressive nature of getting there. We'll see if maybe having a defense makes him more aggressive, right? You know, I've heard some people argue the inverse of like he had to be aggressive because the defense wasn't going to stop anyone on the ground. But what if having a defense just incentivizes him like, hey, I can get stops. Like maybe they'll be even wilder, man. Maybe they'll even go for even more stuff. But Eckler was like the big beneficiary of that last year. I mean, he had more points in the red zone than every player in the NFL outside of Josh Allen. He had 40 more red zone points than Cooper Kupp last year. You know, obviously there will be some regression involved. It's just hard to factor in, like when you look at like these Chargers backs, like who's going to really challenge him for touches like right out of the box. They've kind of hinted they're not really willing to give Isaiah Spiller those touches yet. They just brought in Sony Michel. He's been to the team for a week. Like, is he going to come out of week one and like steal goal line carries? Probably not, right? And then you've got this Raiders defense that's pretty good, like on the front four. The front four here is pretty decent. They add Jaylen Brown at linebacker, so like that's kind of like the air quote strength of this defense. Rushing the passer is kind of the strength. But the back end is still like the weakest link. So even with Patrick Graham coming in for Gus Bradley, we're not going to see that we're going to sit in cover 3 and just rush for there the entire game like we saw last year. There will be more multiple, but like the cornerback depth just isn't here for the Raiders. Like they don't have enough talent on the perimeter here. So that just makes me still want to be aggressive, with Justin Herbert, especially with only having like one weakness on the offensive line, that being right tackle. From every other spot here, like this offensive line is really in place here. This is it for the Chargers, right? Like there's no excuses this year. I know they find a way to get there, like you said, but like, man, this team is so objectively loaded on paper. Like they've got to find a way to cash this in, especially with Herbert, getting closer every year to knocking on that big contract time. I look at Herbert, and obviously you're going to have to pay for him, but I mean, he's a guy that I think is just going to absolutely be like kind of the focal point here of the offense. Cause you even get it too with Eckler in the receiving game. Like there's just a lot of ways to get there with Herbert.
In terms of this is their year, they also drew the Falcons, and I believe they play the Browns whenever Jacoby Brissett's still under center. So a great draw for off-ball games as well for the Chargers. And then, it takes a little bit of faith, like Reeb said, but also if Justin Herbert and the Chargers offense is even slightly more aggressive and he's not stricken to 23rd in air yards per attempt and 25th with a 7.9 yard depth of target, this is literally just fireworks, no matter whether the Raiders answer or not.
John, you got Keenan Allen or you got Mike Williams? Keenan seems a little bit safer and steadier. Mike Williams, a little more up and down. He's certainly going to get that home run hitter, got 120 and 4 catches and 2 touchdowns. And I guess the wild card, like big field tournament, Josh Palmer, I don't hate either. But your preference amongst those 3, if you're making one Herbert stack?
It's the teammate theory, and these 2 highlighted us having internal discussions on what is the better tournament play last year, because Mike Williams was the better tournament play, but then DFS became so sharp that Mike Williams became the highest rostered one every single week, and thus Keenan Allen was actually the better tournament play. And I think that's where I lean again. Allen has averaged 10.7 targets and 14 fantasy points and 27 career starts he's completed. With Justin Herbert, my only concern is that there's been this preseason drumbeat for Josh Palmer out of camp. So much so, not just more 11 personnel, but perhaps playing in more 2 wide sets out of nowhere too, which I guess they would take Keenan Allen off the field maybe. And Keenan Allen's the one who suffered whenever Josh Palmer was on the field. He averaged nearly 4 fewer fantasy points per game from week 14 on, whenever Palmer overthrew Jalen Guyton last year in 11 personnel. And so Mike Williams does, we know, have the ceiling. Mike Williams is, of course, volatile, too. He had 4 top 16 finishes, including 2 overall wide receiver 1 performances in his first 5 games to open the year, and then exited briefly with that knee injury in week 5, and then only had 2 top 12 performances for the rest of the season on a decreased target share. But even, as we said, Raiders offense volatility doesn't mean negative. It could also mean great things. My only issue is that I do think Mike Williams comes in higher roster than Allen, and thus I'm open to being higher on Allen for tournaments.
Yeah, if you like the Ricky Bobby approach, certainly, first to last Williams is certainly interesting. But you make a good point. Williams is a guy you generally want to roster when he's not being that rostered. And I'm not sure how heavily owned he's going to be this week, maybe around 10% or something like that. You like to get him when nobody's on him, obviously. You got to take on that, Rich, as far as the Chargers receivers?
Well, I think that when you look at from this week 1 layout, essentially we brought it up on DraftKings already. I don't know if anyone's going to run wild, right? I don't know if ownership's going to be that big of a factor. We have to run from anybody this early in the season. Typically once we get going in season, the pricing tightens up, and then you get an injury and there's something glaring. But I think it's probably going to be pretty flat this week. I mean, I could be wrong by the time we get to Saturday night, but I don't know if anyone's really going to go crazy in terms of rostership. Yeah, I mean, it's Mike Williams typically gets the types of targets you look for, the end zone vertical targets. I mean, the other guy in this game, too, to kind of look at is Gerald Everett. Chargers used their tight ends a lot last year, a lot more I think people realize because they had to throw multiple bodies at the position. But we've already seen Austin Eckler, on his podcast with Matt Harmon. Matt Harmon's living the life doing shows with Austin Eckler and Stephon Diggs.
Celebrity now.
But Austin Eckler brought up Gerald Everett, too, and his role in the offense. I mean, The Chargers, probably, if you wouldn't know just because they had Jared Cook as their lead guy, but they were 9th in the NFL in targets, 10th in receptions, and 11th in yards from their tight ends last year. And they were also 8th in touchdowns to their tight ends. So if Gerald Everett can kind of squeeze that role into one, I mean, their tight ends were a factor against the Raiders. Jared Cook was a top 12 tight end in both games against the Raiders last year. I mean, he's another kind of one of those cheapy kind of one-off like stacking guys with Josh Palmer. Like you can get a little bit cute with. I just don't know if you're going to get there because I don't think the rostership's really going to go crazy this week because of dudes like Michael Pittman being 5,500 on DraftKings.
The only concern is that I wonder which game is the late swap game. So we have the Giants Titans, which I also think is kind of interesting, but it does offer a lot of cheap wide receivers you could jam in on DraftKings in particular. Raiders Chargers, Packers Vikings, and Cardinals Chiefs. Everyone we know is going to start on the Cardinals Chiefs, and there's only 3 other options to late swap to. And so I wonder if like maybe this is the late swap one. That's the only thing that would scare me about Keenan Allen or Mike Williams.
You got to take on that Robinson, by the way, for the Giants. He's the 3K potential special there in New York, and their receiving core seems like a disaster going into the season. You mentioned it, John. I'm just curious. Is he the most interesting amongst that Giant receiving core that bet on the rookie? Or
Saquon Barkley is probably the most interesting among the receiving core.
That's a good point.
And everyone is aware of it. That's the real issue we need to talk about.
By the way, to the point as far as ownership, I think it's worth noting as far as receivers for the Chargers, when you consider price, it's more of a Fanduel thing because Mike Williams distinctly cheaper, 6.6 on Fanduel, Allen 7.4. So we have this again, grain of salt.
Wednesday which should be inverse on that site, which is weird.
14% for Williams and 5% for Keenan Allen.
That's why I keep coming back to Devontae Adams because on a tight week where everyone's paying up at running back, no one's going to scroll to the top and click on Devontae Adams as the highest priced receiver at 8,500, which is at a reasonable price, especially for Devontae Adams on FanDuel. And that's why I keep coming back to it.
Currently got him like 14% for both sites, more or less. That's where he's at.
I don't know who the hell everyone's playing then, because that's an expensive lineup.
They found themselves a cheap code. They got some extra thousands of dollars somewhere. I don't really know. They'll figure out a way to make it work. We're going to run it back and give our favorite players position by position that we did not talk about in those 3 main games. Do want to mention RotoGrinders, jam-packed with content this NFL season, single entry to showdown, everything in between. We've got you covered this NFL season. That's why you hit the like button. That's why you follow. That's why you subscribe. Not just for this show, but a pile of shows. We're on Sunday morning as well, taking you guys all the way up to lock. Do want to mention Thrive. Join in on the fantasy prop action. This NFL season with Thrive Fantasy, it's an easy-to-play, no salary cap style contest that revolves around over-under style player props. How it works, each prop has a fantasy score associated with the prop. The riskier the prop happens to be, the higher the fantasy score is. You rack up the most points for your share of the prize pool. And, of course, we're going to have a promo code. The promo code is Grinders, GRINDERS, when you sign up for a deposit bonus up to $250, as well as free tickets. Terms and conditions apply. Check out RotoGrinders review page for Thrive Fantasy in the description for more information. And they have a big boy contest, a guaranteed big boy contest going down on week 1. $250,000 prize pool, $25 as far as the entry point, $50,000 up top. And look, they're the sponsor of the show. And for their sake, I hope it sells out. But as somebody that's playing in that contest, it might overlay, which you don't see overlay so much these days anymore. But that potentially could overlay. John, I sent you there's 20 options, right? You got to pick over and under on a variety of things. And again, some you get more points for others because some are more likely to happen. Be as ambitious as you want to be. Do you have a couple winners for the people? Do you happen to have the list in front of you, hopefully?
We already talked about one in Jalen Hurts. I believe the number you sent me was 21.5 completions, right? That's the one that 18.5. Great. I'd love a EV on my hypothetical number I mentioned. So yes, 18.5 completions. That's where I stand. Again, Reeves also backed me. We both think this Eagles offense is going to be more pass heavy, no matter the game script, not only week 1 against the Lions, but overall in general. And so, yeah, I like Jalen Hurts over 18.5 completions.
Yeah, so you get 85 points for that. Now, if you pick under that, you want to be ambitious, you get 115. No. So, yeah, there's a risk reward to it. And, theoretically, you can go 10-0 and still, not win because you're getting less points because you're being less ambitious.
I'm I'm a minus 120 better, even if I lay more. So I'm going to take 85 over 115. That's fine.
Anything else by chance? Yeah, 18.5. You get over 85 points. Is there any other thing on the board? George Kittle, well, I don't know if he's going to play or not, but he's currently plus, we get 120 points if you catch over a half a touchdown. If you catch a touchdown, you get 120 points. Under, you get 80 points. And I assume we'll just throw it off the board if that gets scratched. There's 20 options. So
how about you scroll back up, and I may be stealing riches, but knowing that Jalen Waddle is dealing with the quad injury, and even though if he plays, I still question how much he'll play, especially because we don't know how the Patriots offense that was absolutely putrid preseason is going to respond. So I like Tyreek Hill in DFS. We were going to talk about that as well, but I also think Tyreek Hill over 70.5 yards. Hell yeah. Like this could maybe be his highest target share of the entire year, given Jalen Waddle's pending status.
Is there a realistic chance he doesn't go? Waddle?
I don't know about doesn't go, but I think we're in Chris Godwin state where even if he goes, like what is he? Is he a 60% player?
Do you happen to have a pick, Rich? Was yours just stolen?
No, I mean, looking at these, I mean, you got a lot of injury guys on the board. I mean, you've got Chris Godwin. You can take unders on him and George Kittle. In the event that those guys play or they're limited. Michael Thomas, probably the under 5.5 catches. I mean, 5.5 seems like it's probably a good line, but I mean, how much throwing are the Saints eventually going to have to do? Also, he's got more target competition than any point in his career. The only two good Atlanta defenders are the actual cornerbacks, AJ Terrell and Casey Hayward. And he's hurt too. Like he's coming back from a hamstring injury. Like how effective is he going to be? Feels like a little bit high. Zeke, 1.5 touchdowns against the Buccaneers. Like I know it's only like it's a huge disparity.
60 points though. Yeah, I don't know if I want the 60 points.
Yeah, still though. I mean, like, do you not want free points? Is that still like not the game?
It's 60 points. It could be useful. It's better than a loss, but like, I don't know if I'm conflicted, to be honest. Like I get it both ways, but you did mention the Godwin one. 45.5 is not a huge number, but you get 125 points if you bet it under. And if he's playing hobbled, and I guess if he doesn't play, whatever, it's just going to be thrown away and they'll replace it or something like that. But I think that's interesting if he goes and he's not full go, right? So,
right, yeah, you're like he's a situational player, something like that. Like they're getting him going. I mean, I don't see any reason to put him even on the field in week 1, but it's not up to me.
I agree with you, but again, it's not up to me either. Again, use the promo code Grinders, GRINDERS. You get a sign up bonus up to deposit bonus up to $250 as well as free tickets. Check it out. Check out Thrive and check out that big contest. They have other things going on as well too, but that's just one I felt like we can focus on. We're going to run it back to our favorite quarterbacks. I'll throw it to you, Rich. I see somebody in the chat talking about Lamar Jackson, who's going to, of course, he's going to be reasonably popular versus the Jets. You got Burrow versus Pittsburgh, Rodgers versus Minnesota, and what could potentially be a bit of a shootout. On the other side, Cousins is pretty interesting. Lance is cheap against Chicago. First blood revenge game for Baker Mayfield. Not a first blood revenge game for Joe Flacco. Well, what do you have here, Rich, as far as other quarterbacks that are worth talking about?
It's, it already looks again where we left off last year. I mean, last year was a pay up for quarterback season in terms of redraft and DFS. And it looks like we have that again immediately in week 1. I mean, when you're trying to look for like cheapy values, like the old days, even on DraftKings, like there's not a lot that stands out. Jameis Winston at 5,100 is like the most appealing guy in terms of matchup. But again, like how much they're going to have to throw. There's definitely some upside there, but there's definitely also just like a complete just like pedestrian game, like in the range of outcomes as well. And you ran through a lot of the names. I mean, we've talked about Mahomes, we talked about Kyler, Lamar against the Jets. His by far like his best situation, of the opening 2 months. I mean, their schedule is absolutely atrocious the first like 2 months of the season. But yeah, the Jets, are a team that don't really blitz a lot. That's something that was really Lamar Jackson's like main bugaboo. I think Rashad Bateman's a great play. Mark Andrews is a great play. So you have stacking partners. And then Trey Lance probably again, like Trey Lance, like both sides kind of appropriately prepared for Trey Lance. Like they weren't going to let anyone be like, believe anything that like Jimmy Garoppolo is going to start and like give like a freebie. So I think that will keep like his rostership kind of in check. And like the 49ers didn't really show us anything in the preseason. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that like this offense still could be in a ceiling outcome. Now he's another one of these guys that probably has like a high ceiling and then just like kind of like a pedestrian floor. So you do want to use him like in tournaments, but definitely I'll be monitoring to see like where he's rostered against this Bears defense that's going to be starting quite a number of rookies, especially in the back end, and Tyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker. Like it's like, there's definitely some potential here that like Shanahan's got something for us.
That is the lowest total on the board. A lot of that's in part to the Bears. They have a total on their 17 at 40.5 total as far as that game. What do you have here, John, as far as quarterbacks? Who do you want to focus on that, quarterback we've yet to talk about in the 3 featured games?
It's very similar. Like my pool will probably consist of a lot of Herbert, Derek Carr, Kyler Murray, and like Rich said, we're waiting to see how the field treats Trey Lance. The only other one, since DJ Chark got mentioned, I guess I'll mention my worst play of the week. And I know Reeves also will have a pick that combats this when we get to running backs, but I think Tannehill may be interesting. Like we have to get some pushback from a Giants offense with Daniel Jones, who looked terrible in camp and throughout the preseason, and like are just injured, like littered with injuries throughout their wide receiver core. And honestly, like don't trust any of them either. But if we do get pushback, remember, like Derrick Henry made Ryan Tannehill better. Like Tannehill averaged 8.2 yards per attempt on 144 throws last year with Derrick Henry on the field, 29% of his attempts last season for Tannehill, whereas he averaged Tannehill only 6.3 yards per attempt with Derrick Henry off the field, 344 passes in that last stat. And so, again, it's thin, especially because we don't need the salary. That's really the big picture argument here on DraftKings, is that we don't need it. But if someone says DJ Chark, that's kind of like the cheapest I go at quarterback for me is Ryan Tannehill.
Who would you pair him with? Would it be Woods by default?
Maybe Austin Hooper. But it would be Robert Woods. But for Millie Maker, if someone wanted to do Nick Westbrook-Akeen, just because that's a pivot off of Wan'Dale Robinson, I mean, Westbrook-Akeen may play more snaps than Wan'Dale Robinson the very same game. So why not?
I wrote up Ryan Tannehill in the worksheet, and, I want to be so fully on board with this because
it's the big picture argument. That's the thing.
Yeah. And, with Wink Martindale, especially too, coming over, from the Ravens to the Giants. And think about what Wink Martindale did as a defensive coordinator in the back half of the year with the Baltimore Ravens when they were trotting out like dudes off the street playing cornerback, and he still never adjusted and just put them on islands. They just kept blitzing. And so far in the preseason, all he did was blitz with the Giants. I mean, in the preseason, where like dudes are trying to work through stuff, they blitzed on 44% of dropbacks. They played cover zero on a league high 13% of opponent dropbacks. And this team's cornerbacks, from a starting stance, looks like the Ravens quarterbacks that like we left off at. So I do want to get on board. I think the Giants are going to be a team we target for quarterback play, especially now with Dayball coming over, and they're going to run so much more 11 personnel and kind of be a more aggressive offense. We'll see if it's successful. But the other thing for this game too, and it's early in the week, is it looks like this game could be played in like a thunderstorm. So like keep an eye on that. And like if it just turns into like a slop fest where it's like muddy and Derrick Henry's running the ball 35 times because the Titans are a 7-point favorite, like what are we going to end up getting with it? But I definitely see like the pro argument, because the Giants are a team I have circled like every week. Like they're going to be a team we really, really target for passing game production this year.
Especially because like Barkley can get there when Tannehill gets there. Like Barkley leads the team in targets, and Tannehill still gets there via rushing touchdowns as well.
There's several games, again, Wednesday night that, there's potential weather lurking. You mentioned Tennessee. We'll have to see what Chief Meteorologist Kevin Roth has to say about this on Sunday, but Carolina possibly, Chicago possibly, and I think Cincinnati's another one.
Cincinnati was the other one. It's like basically all the East Coast teams like at that period of time.
Yeah, just sort of keep an eye on it. And like the Vegas numbers will adjust accordingly. Is like, there's a reason why those buildings, they were built. They have the money to figure this stuff out. I want to hear, Rich, I want to ask you about, your thoughts on CMC and Jonathan Taylor and Kambara and Henry and all these guys. But
all of them.
I'm curious who your running back version of Ryan Tannehill is. Who is that?
Oh, me? I don't know. Do I have one? I didn't know if I had one or not.
Didn't John just say that you had to? Did I miss here?
Oh no, I thought he was gonna combat with Derrick Henry because Derrick Henry's a very obvious play as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. I look at that pool. I'm having trouble right now at the start of the week trying to narrow it down because I'm someone that likes to definitely keep a tighter pool of players, and man, all of these guys look so damn good right now. It looks like such a big pay up for running back week. It's just trying to narrow it down and getting the right ones. I mean, we talked about Derrick Henry and like the spot he's in. I had the tweet that showed like when he's been like the past 3 years when the Titans have been a 6 or plus point favorite. I mean, he averages 27 touches per game, 159 yards from scrimmage. The Giants were a team we picked on the entire year. Houston allowed the most rushing yards on explosive runs in the league last year, and they faced the guy that just lives on explosive runs his entire career going back to college, and Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor absolutely eviscerated them in 2 matchups last year. How do you not get with that? Kamara is kind of snuck under the radar because, people were worried about him getting suspended, like what's going to happen. And now he's just going to start the season against the Atlanta Falcon team, like where they're favored. Like he looks great. We've got Austin Eckler, who we talked about. Dalvin Cook is in a new situation where not only does the offense that Kevin O'Connell brings make a Kirk Cousins and his passing game more viable, he's going to run it against lighter boxes for the first time in his career, just due to the fact of how much 11 personnel the Vikings are going to run. So he's interesting. In that same game, both Packers backs are extremely interesting. With especially the injuries that the Packers wide receivers has, and the Vikings were actually worse against the run than the Chargers last year. They were 32nd EPA against the run last year. Haven't really made a lot of changes on the front four. New defensive coordinator Ned Donatel. But man, it is loaded. And luckily, thank goodness, some of these guys are removed from the slate. Like Leonard Fournette looks like a good play. Like it's loaded at the top.
Yeah, man. And like you said, some of the prices, because like when CMC was healthy, he was like a 10K player on DK and he's 8.5. Like, what are we doing here? 8.5. But everything is relative. And, we're seeing Barkley at 6.1, a guy who, when he was, at his peak, he was 8 or 9K. And Taylor, 9.1 on DK. Fanduel, a little bit trickier, 10.2K for Taylor over there. Henry's another guy we paid upwards of 10K. He's 8.6 on DK. Of course, theoretically, the way his game works is a better play on Fanduel than he is on DK, where DK is, full point PPR, and DK's half point. But of course, he's got a good shot at getting those 100 yards.
And Mixon too. We didn't even talk about Mixon. Mixon looks amazing this week too, because the Steelers were awful against the run last year. Stephon Tuitt retires. They really didn't get any improvement in terms of objective personnel additions, and they're huge underdogs on the road, like a typical spot we look for to play a running back, right? And you just talked if the weather becomes a thing where people sleep on it and they just want to play Burrow and the pass catchers because those guys are sexy. I mean, Mixon slaughtered the Steelers in both games last year. He averaged 5.5 yards per carry against them, and that was with the Bengals offensive line of last year, not the upgraded one.
Yeah, pretty good price there on DK at 7.1, 8.3 on FanDuel as well. Harris, I don't love that Pittsburgh line, obviously, but 6.4 on DK seems a little bit too cheap considering his skill set, assuming he's fine with the Liz Frank. Jump in here, John. Who's standing out for you when all things are considered here? Because the top is really good. The opportunity cost is huge as well, which can kind of bring in a Dameon Pierce because he's 4.8 on DK, but we don't know what we're getting. This guy, in theory, it's kind of his backfield, right? And I don't know. But he's cheap and he's probably going to play as a good point per dollar guy in theory. But the opportunity cost is pretty strong at running back. Where are you at here?
Mixon is the one that I'm going to be overweight on. I think he's a great salary, and anytime you can allow me to bet against Zach Taylor being competent, I'm going to take it every chance I get. So I do think Mixon's an amazing play this week, and I'll be overweight on him. My only issue is that I think the running back this week, remember, every slate's different. I think it's the same argument we have for quarterbacks in that it's really hard to pay up, except we at least know quarterback production is replaceable. That's why I kind of like Tannehill and squeezing in a couple expensive running backs as opposed to going down to Dameon Pierce, who we don't know for certain he has passing down role over Rex Burkhead. Going down to Travis Etienne, who has the passing down role, but does he have goal line? He definitely doesn't have early down carries over James Robinson, who we're expecting to play. I even came in thinking I was going to pivot onto Chase Edmonds, at least on FanDuel. Chase Edmonds has never been used on the goal line, just 6 career carries inside the 5-yard line. But we get the coaching staff change to Miami, who concertedly signed him as a free agent. And also Sony Michel released makes it an even more ambiguous situation for a goal line role that could see Chase Edmonds have money touches for the first time in his career. But even then, like, how much am I losing in playing Chase Edmonds, even on a touchdown slot like FanDuel, whenever we have these other explosive options? So I generally don't know if I'm going to sacrifice my positions at running back this week. I think I'm fine just paying up.
What about another kind of sort of cheapie is Antonio Gibson? Obviously, the tragedy of Robinson. Now he elevates as the number one guy there in Washington, but McKissick is still lurking. But, Washington seemed to not like him, right? But now they're sort of stuck with, and they got a matchup here against Jacksonville, home favorites. Reasonable price at 5.8. Where is he in the mix for you, John?
Well, J.D. McKissick through week 12 when he was healthy last year. Remember, now with Brian Robinson out of the way for however long, this is the same situation as it was last year. And J.D. McKissick out targeted Antonio Gibson 70-1 on 3rd and 4th down. So, we don't expect to see targets for Antonio Gibson. That's my only concern. And McKissick was the one averaging career high 11.5 PPR points per game in that stretch until he was injured. And then and only then did Gibson get hammered with 27.5 touches per game. So I don't think I'm as high on him as a lot of others are, but I don't know, maybe I could see it, even though Aaron Jones is only 600 more on FanDuel. So
yeah, I mean, I'm just having a hard time with the Green Bay stuff. At 1A and 1A of Jones and Dillon, and I get it. One of them can certainly break out, but is one of them going to overcome the entire field? It's certainly possible. But what are you doing with that backfield there, Rich, as far as Green Bay? They're not priced like CMC and Taylor and Henry, but of course their portion of the pie is not going to be as great either. I'm sort of throwing my hands up on those two for now. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, from tournament stance, I mean, it's still like Aaron Jones for the ceiling perspective, right? The dude has double-digit touchdowns in each of the last 3 years. And only Derrick Henry has scored in a higher rate of games. It's when he doesn't score, he has that low floor, right? He's way more volatile than people forget. And that's something I brought up with John Daigle show early in the summer, about when he doesn't score touchdowns. So I mean, he would be the guy I would look to for tournament play, because he also has that kind of receiving work too. If this game were to shoot out or somehow the Vikings are ahead, right? He would be the guy to kind of lean on, especially now that it looks like Lazard's not going to play either. At this point of the week. I mean, we'll follow these last 2 days, but I mean, he hasn't practiced yet. So it looks pretty dire for him to start the year too as well. So, I mean, I'm leaning more towards Aaron Jones. I get how Dillon could get there, but I feel even with a touchdown from Dillon, is it enough? Where at least Aaron Jones has a 30 burger in his range of outcomes still. And I don't think Dillon has that.
Yeah, that's a good take. And it's got to be in your tournament pool if nothing else. All right, let's knock out some receivers, some tight ends. We've kept the people long enough. We apologize for running long. It's the first show of the season, when we didn't happen to have any clock. So we just kind of let it go and see how it goes. We're going to go for about an hour and a half. Thanks for sticking with us. Do hit that like button if you guys hanging out in the old YouTube. And if you're listening anywhere on the RotoGrinders platforms, by all means, subscribe, turn on those notifications. Receivers, John, Justin Jefferson certainly popping. You got some, Jamar Chase. We've already talked about it a couple of times on DK specifically. The Pittman price is pretty goofy at 5.5K versus Houston. Everybody likes Pittman in the season long, and now he's opened up the year in a dome there versus Houston at that 5.5 price. 7.2 on FanDuel, playable, but 5.5 on DK is really, really solid. Where do you want to start as far as some receivers you want to highlight on the slate?
And honestly, since Pittman already essentially broke out, he was the wide receiver 6 through week 8. From Carson Wentz before Carson Wentz became Carson Wentz in the second half of the season. And he was the wide receiver 30 from that point on. I'd probably just eat the Pittman chalk on DraftKings, not on FanDuel. We'll get there at tight end. But for me, I also think Elijah Moore, if we're playing Lamar Jackson, Elijah Moore is very interesting. Mm-hmm. We've already seen the stat on Twitter by a lot of people that, Joe Flacco played last year against the Dolphins, and then Elijah Moore had 11 targets from him. Thus, that's the connection. I don't give a shit about that. What I care about is the fact that Elijah Moore, for the first time in his career, was an every down player during the preseason with Joe Flacco and the first team offense. And if you're telling me now Corey Davis is no longer in the way because Elijah Moore's playing consistently in 2 wide sets from Joe Flacco against this Ravens defense, okay, that's where I become interested. And so I do think for the first time in his career, we may see him play 90% of snaps. And that's the targets I want to chase, especially at such a cheap price. And then I already mentioned Tyreek Hill, because of how hidden Jalen Waddle's quad injury has been. And I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to look at injury reports. I'm going to see what happens. But I don't know if Jalen Waddle will be a full-time player. And if that's the case, Tyreek Hill's only 28. Yes, he had a career low in yards per route run last year, but it was still 2.1. It was still an elite measure in a new offense where he can get hammered targets and carries as a wide back option. So I do like Tyreek Hill sneaking him in potentially for, again, his highest target share potentially of the year.
I know Rich gave his thoughts earlier briefly as far as what's going on there with New Orleans and Michael Thomas. I just thought it was of note, and somebody in chat was asking about it, like a pivot away from Pittman on DK, basically a direct pivot with Michael Thomas. But everything is kind of baked into that price, John, at 5.7. He's 6.2 on Fanduel, which is a pretty good price too. And this is one of the best receivers in the league a couple of years ago, the most reliable guy. I know his situation has changed. He no longer has the most accurate quarterback of all time throwing to him. There's more target options out there. But it's all kind of sort of somewhat baked in. This is another tricky one, man. I mean, and a lot of people are just going to wait and see. Let's see what he can do. And there's been chatter as far as how healthy he may or may not be. 5.7 though, Michael Thomas. Are you leaning in? You leaning out? You waiting and see? What are you going to look here? What are you doing?
If I mention Derek Carr, I'm open to Michael Thomas. I don't know how much I'll have of him, but also like, if Michael Thomas plays, Chris Olave is a boom or bust option for me, which again is fine for tournaments. But yeah, I honestly haven't put much thought into it. But 5,700 is pretty cheap. Yeah,
I don't know what I'm doing either, but I just think I'm willing to play anybody for the right price, and that might be the right price. And I don't know. Would you want to expand on that, Rich, as far as Thomas, or we move on? We're moving on.
He's got to show it to me, man. Like I'm fine. Like he's got to show it to me. I mean, especially he's never played with Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston's been out of the lineup basically all preseason with that ankle injury. Thomas has had a hamstring injury following the ankle injury. He's now playing with target competition for the first time in his Saints career since he was a rookie. I just got to see it. I got to see it. There's too many guys. There's too many guys for me.
There's definitely too many guys around that range.
Like I've already talked about Juju and the Sun God. Like I'm into those guys that and Juju's way cheaper. You brought up Elijah Moore. I love the mini of Elijah Moore and Bateman. I mean Bateman's one of these guys that's been out of sight, out of mind. But like he fits this offense a lot better than Marquise Brown did. I mean, and this is a guy that's tremendously talented. And maybe I'm just holding some conviction for both of those players. I love them both so much as prospects. But the Jets were a team we picked on for wide receiver play all year. We talked about Lamar. Andrews is going to be an inherent stacking partner for Lamar, but I think Bateman's in just as good a spot, if not better. Christian Kirk is a guy like I think you can be ahead of early. He's so cheap on both sites. He's not typically like the type of guy you would want to play on FanDuel, but I don't know if you necessarily get hurt this week playing him. I mean, he ran a career high 78% of his routes in the slot last year. He only ran 22 routes this preseason, but he was targeted on 37% of them, 2.5 yards per out run. He's facing a Washington team that was absolutely miserable in terms of guarding slot wide receivers last year. They were 29th in points allowed to opposing slot receivers, 29th in receptions allowed, 29th in touchdowns allowed to opposing slot wide receivers. They swept the board there for the slot machine. So, I mean, he's another guy I'm looking at. Like, yeah, he's really cheap. Darnell Mooney is another guy that could be really cheap and underpriced. I mean, San Francisco is – the thing with the 49ers, though, is like their defensive line is such a mismatch for the Bears. Like, but – they have a bunch of moving pieces on the back end. They've basically moved on from 3 starters last year on the back end. And, how good are those guys? And they replace them. So, like, can you hit something with Mooney? There's just, like I said, a lot of guys in that area that I just feel a lot more confident in, paying for.
I'm sure if Deontay Johnson's ruled out too, George Pickens at 4,100 will also get steamed.
And will be easily avoidable, but
correct.
Be steamed.
You're correct.
I mean, the Steelers scored a touchdown on 2 drives against the Bengals. I know that was with Ben Roethlisberger, but we're talking about weather potentially being an issue. They scored 2 touchdowns against them. The Bengals are still have a really solid defense. The Steelers' offense could actually potentially be worse than people are expecting to as well under Mitchell Trubisky with this offensive line. I'm gonna have a tough time too getting there. I would say maybe you could talk me into maybe a little bit of Claypool, but like I'm not playing any Steelers at this juncture.
Fair enough. Before we move on to tight end, I just want to, as a general thought, John, I guess I'll ask you first. Wide receiver, quarterback matchups, anything stand out for you this week, or is a general rule, do you even care about wide receiver, quarterback matchups?
I'm admittedly not that far into my notes, Dean, so Reeves, with the week 1 worksheet being done, the floor is yours.
No, I mean, especially inherently in a season, that stuff gets, I think, a little overanalyzed from the stance of just like, one, NFL teams don't play a lot of man coverage, right? It's basically a 70-30, like almost zone demand rate in the NFL. And it's typically not just one guy following one guy on those routes when they're in man coverage. So it does get overstated a little bit. We're looking at it more from a top-down stance. You can get all of that stuff just baked into like team stats, right? And like team performance. Like we don't really need to go in the woods unless someone stands out. We also have, in this era of football, very few like elite shutdown corners to begin with. We just have very few of those guys right now. Obviously, Jalen Ramsey is the best cornerback in the NFL, but like really the next best guy, objectively, is AJ Terrell, and he doesn't really get a lot of respect. Did he make a Pro Bowl last year? But is the second best like kind of shadow guy in the NFL. But like, the Revis guys are kind of gone right now in the NFL. We don't have a lot of them to be like really scared of.
And we also know that, like, unless it's Gus Bradley, who you mentioned earlier, who, remember, like, even when Patrick Mahomes was facing a league-high amount of 2-high safeties and teams were containing him and making him, more efficient, but also making him dump it off. Like Gus Bradley in that matchup, Patrick Mahomes still finishes the overall QB1 in the week because he didn't play a single snap from 2-high safety. He rolled cover 3 at him, and Patrick Mahomes burned him for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. And so those are the kind of matchups we look for. I know Reeves also last year, remember, he was the first on Joe Burrow against the Ravens blitz rate. And so as we move along here in the regular season, we'll have those notes. But in particular, straight up cornerback wide receiver matchups, nothing, especially in week 1 from me.
John, you hinted at wanting to talk about a tight end. Bring us home. Let's knock out tight ends.
Mo Alley Cox. If we're chasing touchdown upside on FanDuel, I'm trying to find a way to get on not only the Colts rising team high total, which is second on the board this Sunday slate. I'm also trying to find a way off of Jonathan Taylor, who's like the most expensive running back, if I want to play Christian McCaffrey or look elsewhere at Joe Mixon. Mo Alley Cox has touchdown equity, and I still don't think he's going to catch steam, even being so cheap on FanDuel. And so, like, that's where we get the great equalizer in touchdowns, and that's where I want to play him. And I think it makes a lot of sense since there's no competition. He played every first-string snap with Matt Ryan in the preseason, albeit very minimum. There were only 13, but we have fourth-round tight end Kylan Granson, who only had 11 receptions last year, I believe the number was, and then Jelani Woods, who, like, they're saying might as well turn into a linebacker. He's so lost playing tight end. So, like, there's just no one else who can spike production like Mo Alley Cox can in that tight ends room.
3-4 on DK, 4-8 in FanDuel. I don't want to tell you how low our current projections has him. This stuff will change.
Oh, buddy. I know. I've been burned by Mo Alley Cox before.
But on FanDuel, you're shooting for a touchdown, and that's basically what you're. Obviously
2 touchdowns.
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course. Why not take 2? But a lot of times, DK as well. Like with you get that cheap tight end. I'm curious what people are going to do. More money.
I kind of like David Njoku on DraftKings. Now it's still, on FanDuel, it makes sense to chase touchdowns since also Kyle Pitts is relatively cheap, and I think that's where everyone goes, especially if we lose George Kittle, who would be a good response, a stacking partner with Trey Lance. But David Njoku, like, again, we're just looking for potentially tight ends to lead their team in targets or score touchdowns, and no one can say with certainty that Amari Cooper is going to lead not only Sunday, but for the entire season, the Browns and targets. David Njoku could very well do that. I think it's a great spot, and it'll be further ahead than anyone else will be in tournaments since we haven't seen David Njoku be good since week 6, whenever Baker Mayfield still had a healthy shoulder. Like, after that, Njoku from week 7 on didn't have over 40 receiving yards. So, like, he's just forgotten. But it was before then when he had over 100 yards and a touchdown and 75 yards, his best 2 games through those first 6 weeks. So, yeah, I think there can actually be a lot of production here for Njoku.
They just paid him too, right? Didn't they pay Njoku? I feel like
yeah. I think it was the 6th most annually. Was that it? Something like that. He
got a good chunk of change for somebody that wasn't all that spectacular, and good for him. Rich, your thoughts as far as tight end?
We brought up a lot of the guys that will be in my player pool. I think like my cheapie will be Gerald Everett. I love Goddard as the Pitts pivot. He's kind of the same. He's well underpriced there on DraftKings, but with his Kyle Pitts being 6K on FanDuel, Goddard's 5.7. We'll see if he can kind of slink in there and check in on ownership there. But I think Pitts is going to be pretty popular over there, like Daigle's kind of alluded to. And, Pitts is a guy I really don't have any trouble fading. I mean, I do have some FOMO because I understand the talent, but what has really changed, for his situation? Like, it's still just a bet on talent. And we did this all last year for 17 weeks. And the matchup is shit. The Saints absolutely boxed him last year. He was caged in both games against the Saints because Arthur Smith is a donkey and just lines him up at wide receiver and lets, teams take Kyle Pitts out of the game. Arthur Smith needs to put some faith in me, absolutely, by moving Kyle Pitts around and getting him more some advantageous situations like you should do for your favorite player or your best player on offense. But I actually don't have any problem just coming off the rip and being if the field's gonna be on Kyle Pitts, we did this for 17 weeks last year, I'm going to just go back to the well and say, all right, I'm not going to go and follow the lemmings here. Now, I will have a little bit of FOMO because I understand the talent, but, that's the life I'm going to live. If he's going to be super high owned,
You said you do that on FanDuel too, and that's why Dallas Goedert, as you mentioned, makes so much sense because he's only 300 less than Pitts. No one's going to see it coming from anywhere.
Yeah, and I think Pitts will be popular just inherently because of Hurts. We always get this, right? The QB, when the QBs are going to be high owned, their stacking partners inherently come along for the ride. So I do think people will get there. And I think a lot of people will be like me and look at the Pitts situation because Pitts is one of these guys, everyone understand the talent and the ceiling, but there have been detractors, right? Investment, from an investment stance. He was super rich in redraft, and you got people saying, dude, nothing's changed. He plays for the Falcons. One of the worst offenses in the NFL. Is the QB play any better? Could be worse. Drake London's coming in banged up. So is this really all they have? There's a lot there. I think that there'll at least be enough people still that think about it like me too. Maybe he doesn't go wild, but I'm gonna be watching it because if he ends up being a guy that's gonna push 20% on a slate like this, I'm just gonna go elsewhere.
Current ownership Wednesday night, FanDuel, Kelsey 17%, Pitts 16%, Goddard 13%, Kittle 10%. Obviously that can change. The interesting one to me is Andrews at 5%. Andrews can certainly be the highest scoring tight end in this slate, essentially the same price as Kelsey. DK specifically 14 for Kelsey. We got 11 for Herb Smith, which is kind of surprising.
What's his price? Is he just 3K? Is that what it is?
3-4. Yeah,
right.
I think Komet's 3.7 and 7%. People like the punt there. I get it.
On DraftKings, especially, people will just take the receptions.
Yeah. All right, we said a bunch here. 90 minutes. We appreciate y'all watching the very first show, the very first pick six of the year. You guys know who Hribar and John are, of course. So that's why you're back. That's why you're watching the show. That's why you stuck around for 90 minutes. But just in case they don't know, John, where can the people find you around the interwebs?
It is 4for4.com, and you can use my friend's code, Daigle10, to get 10% off our package right now. The first waiver wire just went up. We have 17 more weeks of this, including me writing it on Christmas Eve, and everyone still yells at me, even though it's a holiday and you're no longer in your leagues. It'll all be there. So Daigle10 will get you 10% off, plus all our DFS content over there as well.
Rich?
At Lord Reeves on Twitter, sharpfootballanalysis.com. The first worksheet is up. The first of, like Daigle said, 18. If you like the cut of my jib and my content, you can use the code RICH25 for 25% off anything over at the site.
Do appreciate y'all watching the show here on RotoGrinders. Do give us a like. Do give us a follow on the old YouTube. Again, Sunday morning, we'll be talking all the way up the lock, starting 10:30 in the morning. Subscribe to the channel. There's shows all throughout the weeks. Start of the NFL season, man. I'm super excited to be back. Same team as always, and cannot wait to be tilting my face off at like 1:03 in the afternoon because my running back's touchdown got siphoned by, I don't know, Rex Burkhead or something like that. That was the NFL Pick Six Show. On behalf of Rich, on behalf of John, producer Devin, I was Dean. Appreciate y'all watching. We're out of here.